some beautiful words in celebration of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Professor Rabbi Carol Balin of the Hebrew Union College is sharing over this season 8 chapters of an alternative book of Numbers as a way of telling the stories of Jewish women who combine civic engagement with Jewish values in a 40-year struggle in the wilderness. Let me share with you her thoughts on this week's portion, Pinchas. She wrote, "For those of you who haven't met her, let me introduce Serach, whose appearance occurs twice in the Torah, once in this week's Torah portion. Serach slips in and out of the text. She's a whiff of a biblical character who's mentioned only 2 times in the entire text and then passes out of sight. She makes her first showing in the book of Genesis as one of Jacob's descendants who went down to Egypt, and makes a comeback in this week's Parsha, Pinchas, as one of the Israelites counted in the census taken before they enter the Promised Land. The mention of her in this week's portion reads simply, the name of Asher's daughter was Serach. So based on that biblical chronology, at a time in biblical history when people's lifespans were relatively similar to what they are today, Serach alone lived for roughly 450 years. And because of her longevity, Serach crops up from time to fill in details about the past. In one story, the first century sage Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai asks his students to describe from their imaginations, from what they read in Torah, the walls of the Red Sea when they parted to let the Israelites pass. And when no one responds, he answers in his own question, claiming that they look like walls of sprouting bushes. And suddenly a voice pipes up, no, it wasn't like that at all. And as the students look up, they see a very wrinkled woman peering in through the window of the house of study. They said, "Who are you?" She said, "I am Serach, the daughter of Asher. And I know exactly what those walls look like because I crossed the Red Sea. I was there." So Rabbi Yochanan said, "What did they look like? Describe them." She said they resembled shining mirrors, mirrors in which every man, woman, and child were reflected, so that it seemed like an even greater multitude crossed not only those of the present, but also those of the past and those of the future as well. And when Serach finished speaking, none dared contradict her because she was there. Professor Balin continues, "Some say that the victors write history, but in reality, writers write history, assisted by memory keepers like Serach bat Asher. As her vision of the sea crossing comes to teach, the past is infinitely inclusive and has the potential to reflect generations to come along with it. Like no other biblical character," she wrote, "I feel inspired by Serach. She's been my muse as I dig to discover untold stories." One day, as I was beginning my teaching career at the Hebrew Union College, the training ground for Reform rabbis, cantors, and educators, I received a mysterious package in the mail. I opened it and unfurled a poster featuring Gertrude Weil, born 1879, died 1971. I'd never heard of her, but I learned that she had fought for women's suffrage, as well as for causes like labor reform and civil rights. Raised as a Reform Jew in Goldsboro, North Carolina, where her grandparents helped found a Reform congregation, Gertrude Weil explained that her passion to serve was rooted in Jewish values. She quoted Micah and said, "Justice, mercy, and goodness were not to be held in a vacuum, but practiced in our daily lives." Her parents, Henry and Minna, prized education for girls and sent her to New York City's Horace Mann School. And in thrice weekly letters home, Weil described her studies, participation in sports, and volunteer work at a kindergarten for poor children. 2 years later at Smith College, she became influenced by the independent women defying traditional norms of feminine behavior of the day, and by the time she graduated in 1901, she called herself an avowed suffragist. Despite her mother's opposition to giving women the vote, Weil helped found the Goldsboro Equal Suffrage Association in 1914 and served as its first president. By 1919, she became president of the North Carolina Equal Suffrage League. And working closely with Carrie Chapman Catt, president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, she traveled the state to rally supporters. Despite Weil's best efforts, the North Carolina legislature defeated the measure by 2 votes. And it took until 1971, the year of her death, for the North Carolina General Assembly to ratify the amendment. Professor Balin continues, as an HUC-JIR professor and a proud Women's College alumna, I was thrilled to learn of Gertrude Weil's accomplishments that set her squarely in the Reformed Jewish past. I began to tell her story in the classroom and found it resonated among students similarly motivated by Jewish values. Gertrude Weil's poster, an online exhibit, was one of 16 created by the Jewish Women's Archive as part of the Women of Valor project, which highlights historically significant women like Olympic athlete Bobby Rosenfeld, Nobel Prize-winning medical researcher Gertrude Elion, and modern dancer and choreographer Anna Sokolow. These women of valor, the professor wrote, have accompanied me throughout the years, even as Serach Bat Asher continues to whisper in my ear.